Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining this colloquium, and I'm quite delighted to present to you this topic, decolonizing astronomy. In terms of in research and education and outreach, uh, the decolonizing astronomy is not just limited to astronomy, but it's also can be extended to other sciences because this colonial science does exist everywhere, and it's a really important issue that we all should be aware of. Uh, some might say this topic could be very radical or critical, looking at the current activities, and that's the very reason that we should be making more awareness of this topic and sort of changing how we behave and how we develop things and our collaborations and and one of the reasons that I'm very keen on this topic that I'm interested in actually driving this discussion is that I am from Sri Lanka originally, and for about more than a decade, I worked mostly with colleagues from Europe, and I worked for institutions in Europe, and at the same time, I have been always interested and trying to work towards developing education and astronomy in developing countries. So these sort of having keeping myself in two different worlds has given me a very interesting perspective on how astronomy has been working in different layers and what should we do to decolonize astronomy. And but whenever I sort of bring this topic up, I get these immediate reactions from colleagues and within the community, trying to sort of argue, saying, but I'm helping, and that's not colonial science. I'm not contributing to that. It's not relevant to me. We are providing all these resources. They should be thankful. Are you suggesting us to stop helping? And so on. And these sort of reactions and arguments only further confirms the lack of awareness of the colonial structure within astronomy, and that we need to move towards decolonizing astronomy efforts in all layers, from research, development, outreach, and education. Um, and I also want to sort of touch base very quickly on what is colonialism and decolonization and the post-colonial period. Um, so we colonialism, there's always this textbook understanding is understand what is colonialism. But also one important thing to keep in mind that colonialism can be sort of differs from person to person or the region to region how they experienced it. And but the basic of it is basically when a one party sort of cedes power to another party and sort of like gain a lot of economic growth and political control over this one party, and on the other hand the colonized party ends up losing their economic freedom and also religious, cultural, and historical sort of all level of societal needs. They lose their control. And on the other hand, decolonization is sort of like the process of withdrawing and restoring the justice through culture, psychology, and giving the economic freedom to this colonized party. And you might also wonder why sort of this is relevant and how this is related to science. And science is and has been always political. And if you and I mean, one of the best examples is if you look at even historically the European glorified scientific revolution era, pretty much everyone who was spearheading the scientific efforts came from a rich, influential family backed by the king and the queen and giving them unlimited resources. Um, so we it, it is very relevant to science, and then so coming back to the colonialism explanations, post-colonialism is uh, considered in, unfortunately, well, there are many different sort of like explanations, but I would say that it is the aftermath of colonialism leading up to today and also going into tomorrow. Uh, it's 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 a new forms of domination and subordination, and you can see these from like where the money is and how the hierarchical system works, and how the racism plays a part, and this gender imbalance, and all of these are sort of outcomes within the post-colonialism, especially in the regions that were colonized, and this sort of lead into these new forms of global empires, which is very much reflected in science as well. Uh, and Whenever I bring up this topic of decolonizing science, or decolonizing in general, there's always this argument within the topic of the social topic of decolonizing, and also within the topic of decolonizing science. There's a reversal of fortune, but we gave you a lot of wealth, we gave you this structure, we left you some things that you can actually continue. But the studies has shown that the countries that were doing quite well before the colonizers came ended up being really, really worse, and it took years and years for them to sort of come to a place that is sort of livable conditions. And but still many countries are struggling, and struggling economically and politically because of this. And the one of the another side effects of colonialism is actually uh, this the hierarchical systems and elitism, and globalization. So interestingly, uh, we there's a lot of like let's even in Sri Lanka, there's the language English has played a part in dividing in people into different communities and classes, and and leading up to this, putting certain people in very marginalized communities, and also uh, this led up to sort of like a hierarchical system, and which reflects in how a professor and a student behaves in a country like Sri Lanka, and how a professor and a student behaves in a country like Netherlands. And there's this huge hierarchical gap, and if, I don't think the way things are going, it would actually loosen the gap in at least in the next 5-10 years. And this also plays a color of your skin, age, and the networks membership, um, and so on. um, and and I previously I mentioned about the globalization of like the how the textile industry works, and I sort of want to mention how globalization in terms of education is, where you can uh, find these standardized tests nowadays, uh, which is set up by which is basically set up by Western world, and pretty much everyone else has to sort of reach up to that level. And this reflects on many other, not just education, like many other fields, when it comes to globalization, where there's always this agenda from the Western countries that everyone else has to sort of like reach to that level. And because of lack of resources, it's such a difficult thing to come up to that point, come up, look up, like sort of reach up to that level. And this also reflects in science, and not just in the education and the different other industries. uh, so in when it comes to academia, it's I think the first step is to sort of like being aware of these issues and sort of acknowledging that, and then move into reshaping our mindsets and sort of changing our the current structures. And if you look at large research programs, that many of them are sort of has these collaborations going, building infrastructure in developing countries or global south regions, or even at times in indigenous lands. And this in recent times, this has been a huge issue, and when more and more people come into understanding and aware, uh, these issues actually rise. And I've had argument why people didn't like why these local communities didn't question these before. Why is it now, not before? And uh, and and that's actually part of the reason that awareness is important, because when I say decolonizing astronomy, like that we all need to have an understanding, I don't mean that the global north or the western countries should have this understanding alone, but it's also important to have the understanding from the other side, uh, the colonized countries, the indigenous communities, and so on. So the both parties need to have an understanding, and come into like better collaborations. And even myself, I have been on the side where I was contributing to efforts of colonial science. And one of the good examples I can give is about maybe about more than 10 years ago, or almost 20 years ago, um, when somebody sent me an email saying, "Oh, I would like to come to Sri Lanka to do a workshop or give a talk to local astronomy community of students." I would immediately jump into this opportunity, because one of the reasons is that we are lacking opportunities still 20 years later. So anything that would come our way, I would jump into that. And often these things sort of happen without thinking long term or the local effects. And so somebody would come into the country and give one talk, spend some time, enjoy the beautiful weather, food, and everything, and leave. So there's no long-term thinking on long-term collaboration. So actually, even to look at what really needed locally. So it took me a while to really look at these things, look at my activities, how I behave, and change myself to sort of support and move into decolonizing astronomy efforts. Uh, and in terms of one of the larger well-known issues is the TMT issue. And there was a really nice paper published by Kanamaku, and where they list, where the whole team lists actually this number of actions you can take. And I want to highlight two of them. That two of these recommendations is to establish a cultural impact assessment process, and also to establish this ethical guidelines and accountability structure. This last part, accountability, is I think one of the most crucial things in science, that we really lack accountability. And so I think when it comes to larger programs, it's really important to look at these such structures and recommendations from these communities that are more aware of what is locally happening, what are the local needs. And uh, and and you might also see, I'm actually presenting this slide is from uh, uh, well, a lecture that happened uh, at a symposium at the Leiden Observatory, uh, from Pedro Russo and Tana Joseph. I would also recommend to look at Tana's work online, and she's also working on the same topic, and she has some couple of lectures online. Brilliant work. I would highly recommend watching them. So you often see still nowadays how these narratives and frameworks are in place, where, for example, well, this is from European Space Agency, where they pride themselves like once explorers, always explorers. But this has such a negative annotation, where if you um, look at the historical perspective of this, that explorers and these discoveries and the discovering new worlds never really had a positive outcome. So these it's really important to sort of look at these narratives and present them in a very inclusive way and a mindful way. um, and sorry and also these the other aspect of these large research programs is to sort of like, there's always this understanding and claim, okay, we are allocating large amount of funds which can help to build human capital development in this particular region. And this, without really good local collaborations and expertise, this could come across very much as a white savior syndrome, in the sense that we are giving you jobs, we are actually putting out this structure locally because you can't do it, so we are here to help you. So it's really important to sort of overcome these white savior syndrome, and to have a meaningful collaborations with local experts and local authorities when it comes to these research programs. Um, and another thing I wanted to point out from this the same talk that Tana and Pedro presented, that salary differences between these in these international staff and local staff in the same institutions, or rather offices. So that's also something that we need to sort of look into. At the same time, in order to get a expert from another sort of a country, um, need to be the job has to be more attractive, somebody to actually sort of leave and move to a new location. And but at the same time, we need to be mindful about how the locals are being paid, how the local staff is treated. So this is another crucial aspect that we have to keep in mind. um, and also, the return of investment through publication and furthering knowledge is two really large outcome many of these research programs lists. And but how do you really justify this? One of the ways you could look into the real ROI is to check uh, how many number of first of the publications from the region come in, and how many number of local expertise are part of research publications. And for example, someone could look into how much of SK first of the papers are sort of based locally from local experts, and how many local experts are involved in publications. So um, right. So from research, I want to sort of move into outreach now. And earlier I mentioned about this globalization efforts, where always having this global agenda, and these countries has to sort of um, move their way up to fulfill this agenda. And this reflects in some of our outreach programs, especially the global outreach programs. There's been many global outreach efforts to celebrate certain things, and to celebrate days or weeks or certain things, and without a local relevance. And uh, and sometimes I have also experienced myself, and I have seen these communities experience the same thing, where when you're part of a society, or a community, or a sort of even like a larger office, that you have the pressure of to represent your country, or to bring your country into this large global outreach efforts. And but most often we fail to sort of really really relate it to back to the local needs and local relevance. So it's really important to look at these global agendas and what's their importance in and uh, local relevance. And the other part is actually also this pressure to sort of be a part of a global agenda for just to fulfill like a world map, and to say like 100 countries celebrated this or 150 countries celebrated this. And but in reality it's actually more correct or more inclusive if we sort of represent in a better way. So rather than saying we reached 100 countries, we could be more mindful and say we had 150 events in 100 countries, which is much more of an accurate representation, because in this representation also had led to problems in some countries where when you have so many different astronomy communities within the country, and only one community is part of the global uh, effort, the other communities might feel left out or have create local problems because they are not able to be a part of that global effort. And also it's really important to so having an understanding of these, it's quite important to sort of look into project proposals and collaborations in a very critical way, that it's important to have like local experts on board and bringing this local understanding and relevance and think bit long term. And otherwise we sort of end up doing these parachute science efforts where somebody from a western country or somebody from a wealthy country would just go to a developing country and do one of a seminar or workshop and leave without having much of a local relevance or understanding or building any long-term efforts. Um, and moving into education part, we are still using our core science curriculum is very much of Eurocentric right now, and it seems like it's going to continue for a while. So, and another important thing is whenever this topic comes out, a lot of people argue like, so are you asking to get rid of the Eurocentric curricula? And but that's actually not, that's the wrong way to think. It's more about acknowledging the current core curricula is very much of Euro and Western centric, and sort of bringing this um, um, diverse perspective from indigenous communities, non-Western communities, and global South, and sort of have a balanced sort of teaching curriculum. Um, and interestingly, there's a study showing that vast majority of the students in globally sort of experience science as sort of like a foreign culture, because it's such a Western centric curricula, so it feels very much foreign. But on the other hand, teachers in don't really think it that way, as it's they teach is rather like a subject. So there's this imbalance between how science is taught and how science is learned. Um, so it's very much of a need of changing these perspectives, moving into a balanced curriculum. Um, and so looking at going through this all research, education, and outreach, um, it seems like that our system in astronomy seems like it's broken, but it is not. It's actually the whole system was built this way, and which means we can change it. And it's so thinking about taking actions that we can do to decolonize astronomy is confronting how imperialism, colonialism, sort of shaped modern science, and which allows us to sort of change our approaches to this localized hierarchical system and elitism in academia. And I specifically say localized because it not only exists from these Western countries to non-Western countries, but within the local communities, it exists very much. And and then we can take actions to avoid parachute science efforts in astronomy, and sort of recognize the this glorified science that we are teaching in our curricula from Western centric education, and sort of redesign to include this different perspective from non-Western, indigenous, and other local understanding. Uh, and sort of lastly, I kind of want to leave out saying that uh, it's not really about erasing a colonial history and colonial structure. Or that the influence it had, but it's more about acknowledging these issues and reshaping our mindset. And that's sort of the key to produce this inclusive environment in our academia and education, which can be very much of uh, a long-term process. But I think if we all together take steps towards that, it is achievable. And because we people created this people created this system, so we are people, and we are able to we should be able to change it and reshape it in a way that sort of beneficial for everyone. So I hope this talk has given you some perspectives into decolonizing astronomy in research, education, and outreach, and sort of get get yourself to change your mindset and start questioning and thinking about how you can play a role. With that, thank you so much for your time, and I'm happy to discuss this further. And so feel free to reach out to me. Thank you so much.